Welcome to the Cyrus and Alice Yawkey House Museum. Cyrus Carpenter Yawkey was one of Wausau's leading citizens. This monumental classical revival house was built in 1901. At the then staggering cost of $35,000, it was by far the most expensive house built in Wausau at that time. The classical revival style of architecture became extremely popular because of the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. In 1974, the Yawkey House was one of the first houses in Wisconsin to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places because of its high architectural style as a fine example of the classical revival. It is the only complete estate in existence in Wausau that has the original house, the carriage house, and a formal garden with a pond, fountain, and pergola. It is a local treasure. It is equally important historically because of the family who built and lived in the house.
I was born in Chicago on August 29, 1862, into a family of well-established lumbermen. My grandfather owned a lumber company on Ohio, and my father, Samuel Yawkey, was a pioneer lumberman in the Saginaw Valley of Michigan in the 1850s. I grew up in Saginaw, where I received my primary and secondary education. At age 18, I graduated in 1880 from Michigan Military Academy of Orchard Lake, Michigan. After graduation, I worked as a hardware clerk, and then, along with a partner, started a small business of our own in Saginaw. I married Alice Maud Richardson in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on October 13, 1887. Our only child, Leigh, was born on August 24, 1888. In 1889, our family moved to the north woods of Wisconsin. There, my uncle, William Yawkey, George Leigh, and I organized the Yawkey and Leigh Lumber Company. A town was founded by the venture, and it was Alice who named it Hazelhurst due to the abundance of hazelnut trees in the area. 12 years after we began, we had succeeded in developing a large lumber operation there, with a sawmill, a planing mill, a box factory, and a 25-mile logging railroad. When our daughter Leigh was ready for secondary schooling, we decided to move so that she could attend a larger school. We chose Wausau, not only because of the proximity to Hazelhurst, but also at the urging of my close friend Walter Bissell.
Cyrus and I had met in northern Wisconsin, and I had told Mr. Yawkey that Marathon County was the best place to settle. Mr. Yawkey moved his family and his business to Wausau in 1899. They retained their home on Lake Catherine, near Hazelhurst, and returned for many years to spend the summer. It was fortunate for Marathon County that the Yawkeys chose Wausau for their home. The white pine that had created great wealth for some was almost gone, and in spite of the fact that Wisconsin produced a record volume of white pine in 1892, most lumbermen knew that its end was near, and they needed to diversify if they were to maintain their lifestyle. Many of the lumbermen of northern Wisconsin moved their families to Wausau, not only because it was the largest commerce center in northern Wisconsin, but also because of its natural beauty. Cyrus Yawkey took the lead and was instrumental in organizing a group of local lumbermen and other businessmen. This group became known as the Wausau Group. Their goal was to diversify the economy after the white pine was gone. They accomplished this by pooling their resources and investing in Wausau's economy. This group started several new industries as well as all of the utility companies. They began meeting regularly in 1901 at the newly completed Wausau Club. The core of the group was lumbermen, including Cyrus and me, Alexander Stewart, Walter Alexander, John Ross, and Charles Winton. Many other men were involved at different levels and degrees, but there was never any doubt that Cyrus Yawkey was the undisputed leader of the group.
The Wausau Group was successful and did indeed diversify and improve the economy of the entire area. They started 3 paper mills, the Wausau Paper Mill in Brokaw, the Wausau Sulfate and Fiber Company in Mosinee, the first full sulfate pulp-making plant in the United States, and the Marathon Paper Mill in Rothschild. After the success of these companies, the group turned to other endeavors, such as insurance. The Wausau Group established the Great Northern Insurance Company in 1909 and Employers Mutual Liability Insurance Company, Wausau Insurance, in 1911. In addition, they established the Marathon Electric Company and reorganized Murray Manufacturing to produce paper mill equipment in the early 1920s. In addition to being the leader of the Wausau Group, Cyrus Yawkey accomplished many independent endeavors as well. With his good friend Walter Bissell, he formed the Yawkey-Bissell Lumber Company of Wausau in 1905. In spite of the heavy load of his business interests, Mr. Yawkey did not neglect his civic duties. During World War I, he organized a citizen military training camp that became a part of the Wisconsin National Guard. For this effort, he was promoted to Army Colonel. He served many years on the Marathon County Park Board and through his generosity helped to establish the Riverside Park, the Dells of the Eau Claire, and Yawkey Park. Cyrus Carpenter Yawkey continued to be a supporter of Wausau and Marathon County businesses and civic matters until his death in 1943 at the age of 81 years. Mr. Yawkey and the Wausau Group changed the direction for Wausau at the turn of the century. Wausau moved from a 19th century lumbering town to a 20th century city with a diversified economy. This impact is still felt today.
Like my husband, I was very involved in Wausau's welfare and contributed generously to the community. Both of us were deeply involved and committed to our church, the First Universalist Church. I was involved in the Ladies' Literary Society and the Tuesday Music Club. I belonged to 3 patriotic organizations, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Mayflower Society, and the Colonial Dames. My interest in drama led me to direct several community plays, many of them performed in the upper level of our carriage house. I always had a keen interest in the fine arts. In my many travels, I collected over 300 Victorian glass baskets, and after the 1907 remodeling, they were displayed on the glass shelves in the sun porch. Both of these collections are now housed at the Woodson Art Museum. Some of the glass baskets, on loan from the Woodson Art Museum, are on display in the living room of the Yawkey House.
The Yawkeys created quite a stir in Wausau with this house. To begin, they purchased the lot bordered by 3 streets and had 3 houses moved before construction began. They then hired Milwaukee architects Henry J. Van Ryn and Garrett de Gellicke to design their house. Mr. Van Ryn had already become noted in Wausau by his designs of 2 schools. While the building of this house was the talk of the town, large, elegant homes were not new to Wausau at the turn of the century. The neighborhood from 4th and Grant Streets to 8th and Franklin Streets was populated by most of the lumbermen, the industrialists, and the merchants of the city. Only 6 years after moving into the house, the Yawkeys hired Chicago architect George Washington Mayer to remodel and add on to their house. Mayer had made a great architectural impact on the wealthy people in Wausau, having designed 3 large stucco houses in the Prairie style. He also designed the local public library in the same style in 1907. Mr. Mayer accepted a double challenge when he agreed to work for the Yawkeys. He stated in a local newspaper interview that the Yawkeys were his most formidable clients. While his previous Wausau clients had been very wealthy, he knew that the Yawkeys were both the social and civic leaders in Wausau, and it was important that he satisfy them. His other challenge was an architectural challenge, how to blend the classical revival style with the prairie style. Mr. Mayer certainly must have succeeded in satisfying the Yawkeys, because 6 years after remodeling their house, they hired him to design a home for their daughter and son-in-law.
We moved to Wausau from Hazelhurst when I was 12 years old. My parents wanted a quality education for me, and Wausau was a fine choice. I later was graduated from Ogontz School in Philadelphia. In 1911, I married a Kansas City attorney, the handsome H. Perrin Woodson. We were married at the First Universalist Church in Wausau. Mother was my matron of honor. A reception for 200 followed at the Yawkey home. The house and gardens were transformed for the finest wedding reception Wausau had ever experienced. Following the wedding, H. and I moved to Kansas City, but Mother and Father begged for us to return to Wausau. With the promise of H. to become part of the Wausau group, we did return to Wausau. Father hired George Mayer to design and build a house directly across the street from the family Yawkey House. We moved into our new prairie-style house in 1914 and lived there for the next 40 years. After my father's death, Mother continued to live in their home until her death in 1953. My daughters and I gave the house to the newly formed Marathon County Historical Society.
The 2007 authentic restoration, completed in spring of 2008, would not have been possible if the Historical Society had not had Mr. Mayer's blueprints from 1907. Two of the Yawkeys' great-grandchildren were a tremendous help in finding two inventories, one completed after Mr. Yawkey's death and another made after the death of Mrs. Yawkey. With these lists, we were able to have first-hand knowledge of what the Yawkeys liked and had in their house. One thing evident from the inventories is that Alice Yawkey loved French antique furnishings. The Yawkey House Museum is important as it offers a historical experience and an in-depth look back in time to see how a wealthy lumberman's family lived at the first quarter of the 20th century in Marathon County. When the Yawkey House became the headquarters for the Historical Society, many drastic changes were made to the house, especially to the second floor. The walls were removed and reconfigured to allow for an exhibit and theater. For nearly 40 years, the house served as the Society's museum. In 1995, the Society headquarters moved to the historic Woodson House across the street, and in 2006, plans for restoring the Yawkey House began. A $3 million restoration was completed, and the house reopened to the public in 2008. Come join us for a step back to 1907 to view the elegance of Wausau's past.